have been driven by other factors and not actually by the oil price. And even though the oil price has been good for the economy as a whole, there has been this mismatch of stock market prices with what's actually been going on in the economy and how, as a country, we have actually been performing, which is quite
portfolio for very wealthy clients and brought on client assets more than $250 million, generating revenue of $2 million after all costs. He won a Grocery Investment Professional Award in City Wealth Magazine 2006 survey with a black belt, first dan in martial art of Jiu-Jitsu. I have to leave him alone with you on the stage.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here today. I'd like to thank Dr. Turkestani and the university for making this possible. Now, among all the speakers, I'm probably the least academic, and I doubt if there's anything I can teach you about Islam or Islamic finance. However, I do have some observations I would like to share based on my experience so far. Now, there's lots of talk about Islamic finance growing at fast rates. However, when you get fast growth rates, you also get growing pains. And this is why I've made the theme of the talk one of adolescence. Because teenagers, as you probably know, think they know best, and they rebel, and don't want to listen to their parents. It reminds me of a phrase by Winston Churchill, Britain's wartime leader. He said that from the age of 16 to 21, I thought my parents knew nothing. But by the age of 22, I was amazed at how much they'd learned. So in other words, their wisdom had been there all the time, but because of our mood and our phase, we'd forgotten that wisdom. And I think that's happening in Islamic finance at the moment. Let's move past my background, which is covered. Now, by way of introduction, I actually believe what's going on in markets is very positive, which might sound a bit strange. But like many things in life, what at first seems painful is actually a blessing in disguise. Why? Because I believe this is the end of a dark age of debt creation. And like all deformations and periods of change, it's very painful. But it needs to be painful to reject the old ways and welcome the new. Because pain is part of the cure. So the topics I'm covering today involve pushing the boundaries, looking at some possible solutions, and just a quick word on what's happened to me personally. So when it comes to pushing the boundaries, you think, well, okay, it's all very well to say the West is going downhill and it's had its day. But it's really worth looking back and saying, why did the West become so successful, particularly in America? And I believe that the success was based on the work of the founding fathers who wrote the American Constitution. They fought off the British and formed their own independent United States. Their idea was that they wanted the country to be for the benefit of future generations and not just for them. And because they laid such a solid groundwork, the 19th century was one of great prosperity, of a strong currency, based of course on gold and silver, but the idea that money could be used productively through venture capital. Now sadly in the modern era, the founding fathers have been let down, not by anything from the outside, but from decay from within. And the decay comes from inflation mongers, people who mass produce money, who are bailing out the economy at any excuse. Why? Because it makes them popular, it's a short-term popular solution. So it's been failed from within. Now, looking at Islamic finance, in this adolescent phase, there's always a paradox, particularly with teenagers, because they want to follow fashion, but they're looking for their own identity as well. And this is typical. I was in Riyadh the other night, I saw all the kids on their skateboards trying to look cool and trendy. And that's just a fact. And this too is happening in Islamic finance, where everywhere you look, the products look more and more Western. And likewise with Sukuk, before Dr. Usmani came out and said that many of the issues were not compliant, more and more were being issued with guaranteed capital, and guaranteed rates of return. But also for teenagers, they don't want to sound old-fashioned or like their parents. And for me, when I go to an Islamic finance conference, I very rarely hear any talk about Islam. It's all about finance. I think, well, okay, this is not what I'm here for. I want to hear what the Prophet, peace be upon him, did and what examples he gave for modern finance. Other pitfalls I see are the way that the products are being copied. Now, for example, we see the use of hedge funds and mimicking the returns from hedge funds using swap contracts. Also, I think there's a strange pattern at the moment whereby many indices in Islamic finance are offered by Western institutions and banks. I just can't see why this can't be done locally. And if anyone wants a hand producing an index, I'd be more than happy to do it. It's not difficult. So part of the benefit of sticking to the rules in Islamic finance is that, as Dr. Sami was saying, this creates stability. You're not going for growth all the time or trying to abuse the natural order. You want a nice, stable banking platform. However, at the moment, if anyone says, oh, bring Islamic finance back to basics, they're accused, like I was 2 weeks ago in Bahrain, of trying to bring Islamic countries back to the Stone Age. It's a case of don't rock the boat, no controversy here. Now there's a strong temptation to offer these guaranteed products and fixed returns because it's easy for the bank and the institution and investors, apparently like it. And more I see the exception in Islamic finance becoming the rule. So more and more tenuous concepts are being used as an excuse to repeat these products. So typically they obey the letter of the law, but not the spirit. You might say, well, why should I stick to basics? Why should I not try and copy Western products? Well, I believe that complexity is not clever. And the beauty of the credit crisis is a revelation of an ugly truth that complex products are full of trickery, they'll probably lose you money. So if this comes to an end, then that's all well and good. Likewise with derivatives, it's very tempting to hedge yourself all the time. And it's clear from the amount of derivatives in circulation that it's far more than hedging. In the credit default swap market, there is a far greater notional value compared with all corporate bonds. So obviously there's speculation going on. But it's a bit like doing something bad individually. If we all do it, the environment suffers. And the example I've given here is with toxins. Now, in the old days, in the 60s, people were using pesticides to help the crops. And over time, the poison accumulated and went up and up the food chain and got more and more deadly. And this is the same with derivatives. The more they are used, the greater the systemic risk. And as things stand, we now have, per person on the planet, an exposure of $200,000 notional each. And it only takes a small mistake, as Dr. Ignacio was saying, a small loss or small percentage deterioration can wipe out significant amounts of capital. So in the case of the world economy, we have 45 trillion GDP, and yet all derivative exposure is 30 times the world economy. So basically we're like an investment bank. So what is this crisis doing? I believe it's going to bring an end to fractional banking, which is in itself an imbalance of risk and reward, which is what Sharia-compliant investment is not. So looking at potential solutions, well, we'll look at the bottlenecks first of all. One thing that a lot of people complain about is the cost of products and services for that matter. As we all know, there's a lack of scholars, especially those with financial sophistication. And even where there isn't a shortage of scholars, you often find consultants and advisors hoarding data, not sharing information, and charging very high levels for their services. So in effect, they become a barrier to entry. So you're trying to produce a product, you have immediate, very high costs, which you pass on to the client. I've done a core list of beneficial and non-beneficial aspects to products, which you'll all recognise, but it's a possible way of looking at a core set of principles to judge products, whether they are good or bad. I call it the elephant test because when you look